Introduction to Philosophy and its Branches. We will start with the most fundamental question of all in this field. What is philosophy? Before we can explore its complex ideas, we must first understand what the activity itself is. We must define this ancient field of study and outline the main branches of inquiry, the great pathways of thought that philosophers have explored for thousands of years. Let us begin with the word itself. The word philosophy comes to us from two ancient Greek words. The first word is philo. This word means love, not just a simple liking, but a deep affection, a friendship, a devotion to something. The second word is sophia. This word means wisdom. It represents understanding, knowledge, and the deepest kind of insight. When we put them together, philosophy literally means the love of wisdom. At its heart, that is what philosophy is. It is not a collection of facts, but a pursuit. It is an activity. It is the love of wisdom, the desire to understand the world and our place within it. More formally, philosophy is the systematic study of general and fundamental questions. These are the biggest questions we can ask. Questions about existence itself, questions about knowledge, questions about values and reason and mind and language. Philosophy is the activity of critical thinking and reasoned argument. It is the process of examining our most basic beliefs to see if they are true and to understand why we hold them. As you rest, let your mind gently consider these fundamental questions. What does it mean to be? What is real? How can we be certain that we know anything? What is the difference between a belief and a truth? What makes an action right or wrong? What is justice? What is beauty? What is a self? What is consciousness? These are the questions of philosophy, and for centuries, thinkers have developed a structure to explore them. This structure is divided into three main branches. If you can, picture a great tree with a trunk rooted in the love of wisdom, and from it, three massive branches reaching out. The first great branch is called metaphysics. The word meta in Greek means beyond or after. Physics refers to the physical, natural world. So, metaphysics is the study of what lies beyond the physical. It is the branch of philosophy that explores the fundamental nature of reality, existence, and being. Metaphysics asks the questions: what is the world made of? Is it only physical matter, or is there something more? What is time? What is space? Does causality, the chain of cause and effect, govern everything? And what is the nature of a self? Are you your body? Are you your mind? Or are you something else? This is the branch of reality. The second great branch is epistemology. This word comes from the Greek episteme, which means knowledge. Epistemology, therefore, is the study of knowledge itself. This branch does not ask what is real, but instead asks, how can we know what is real? It investigates the very nature of knowledge, belief, and justification. Epistemology asks the questions: how do we acquire knowledge? Do we learn everything from our five senses, from experience? Or are we born with some innate understanding, some capacity for pure reason? What is the difference between believing something and knowing it? Can we ever be truly certain of anything? This is the branch of knowledge. The third great branch is axiology. This word comes from the Greek axios, meaning value or worth. Axiology is the study of value. It explores the nature of goodness, beauty, and justice. This branch itself has two main parts. The first part is aesthetics, which is the study of art and beauty. It asks, what makes something beautiful? Is beauty just a personal opinion, or is it an objective quality? The second part, and the one we will focus on in our studies, is ethics. Ethics is moral philosophy. It is the study of goodness, of right and wrong. Ethics asks the questions: what is the good life? What does it mean to be a good person? How should we behave toward one another? Are there moral rules that are true for everyone at all times? Or is morality relative to our culture or our personal feelings? This is the branch of value and of morality. Let that structure settle in your mind without any effort. Metaphysics, the study of reality; epistemology, the study of knowledge; and axiology, the study of value. These branches give us a map for our journey. Now, let us place these ideas in their historical context. The father of Western philosophy is often considered to be the ancient Greek philosopher, Socrates. He lived in Athens over 2,000 years ago. Socrates was a fascinating figure. He did not write any books. He did not give lectures to quiet audiences. Instead, he spent his days in the marketplace, the agora, simply talking to people. He would approach a politician, or a soldier, or an artist, and he would begin to ask them questions. This method, now called the Socratic method, is the very essence of philosophical practice. He would ask a respected general, "What is courage?" The general might answer, "Courage is standing your ground in battle." Socrates would then ask, "But is it not also courageous to retreat if it saves your army?" Through this process of calm, logical questioning, Socrates would reveal that the people who thought they were wise, the people who were most certain of their beliefs, often did not know what they were talking about. They were full of assumptions and contradictions they had never examined. This is the beginning of wisdom. For Socrates, wisdom was not about having all the answers. It was about realizing how much you do not know. Socrates famously stated, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Let that phrase rest in your mind. The unexamined life is not worth living. What he meant is that a human life spent just going through the motions, without ever stopping to think about why we do what we do, or why we believe what we believe, is not a life lived to its fullest. Philosophy, for Socrates, was the act of self-examination. It is the tool we use to live a deliberate, meaningful life. It is not about what to think, but how to think. This love of wisdom is not just an abstract historical exercise. It is the foundation for almost every other field of human thought. Before there was science as we know it, there was natural philosophy, thinkers using reason to try and understand the cosmos. Before there was modern psychology, philosophers were exploring the nature of the mind and consciousness. Our modern systems of law and government are built directly upon the foundations of political philosophy, the search for justice, and the best way to live together. Our advances in computer science and artificial intelligence are rooted in the philosophical study of logic and the nature of thought itself. And in your own life, every day, you are a philosopher. When you think critically about a news story and ask, "How do they know that is true?" you are practicing epistemology. When you face a difficult decision and ask, "What is the right thing to do here?" you are practicing ethics. When you wonder about your purpose or the meaning of your life, you are practicing metaphysics. Philosophy is simply the practice of thinking clearly, deeply, and critically about the world and your place in it. It is the original and most essential human skill. It is the examination of life. We have now defined philosophy as the love of wisdom. We have outlined its three great branches: metaphysics, the study of reality; epistemology, the study of knowledge; and axiology, the study of value. We have now built our foundation. Of these three great branches, reality, value, and knowledge, there is one that must come first. Before we can explore what is real or what is good, we must first establish how we can be certain about anything. We must first understand the tools we have to find the truth. This leads us to our next lesson, our next logical step in this journey. We will now turn to that second great branch, epistemology, the study of knowledge. In our first lesson, we defined philosophy as the love of wisdom and outlined its three great branches. We concluded that before we can explore reality or morality, we must first understand the foundation upon which all our other ideas rest. We must ask, how do we know what we know? We now arrive at our second lesson, Epistemology, the study of knowledge. Let this word settle in your mind. Epistemology. It comes from two Greek words, episteme, which means knowledge, and logos, which means study or account. Epistemology, therefore, is the branch of philosophy that investigates the nature of knowledge itself. It is the study of knowledge. This segment will be our guide. As you continue to relax, as you drift deeper, we will gently investigate these questions. What does it truly mean to know something? How do we acquire this knowledge? And what are the limits, if any, to what we can know? There is no need to concentrate. Simply listen as we explore. For thousands of years, philosophers have tried to find a clear definition for the word knowledge. The most classic definition, one that comes to us all the way from Plato, is that knowledge is justified true belief. This definition has three distinct parts, like three legs of a stool. For you to truly know something, you must have all three. Let us examine them, one by one. The first part is belief. To know something, you must first believe it. You must accept the proposition as being true. If you do not believe that the Earth orbits the Sun, you cannot know that the Earth orbits the Sunday. Belief is the starting point, the subjective component. It is the state of your mind holding an idea. The second part is truth. The belief you hold must be true. It must correspond with reality. If you believe the moon is made of green cheese, you do not know it because it is false. Knowledge must be anchored in the way the world actually is. A lucky guess that happens to be wrong is not knowledge. A deeply held belief that is false is not knowledge. The truth is the objective component, the part that exists outside of your mind. This brings us to the third part, the most crucial and most debated part of the definition, justification. Your true belief must be justified. You must have a good reason for holding that belief. Imagine you are looking at a clock on the wall that, unknown to you, is broken. It stopped at exactly 10:30 a.m. yesterday. You happen to look at this broken clock at exactly 10:30 a.m. today. You form the belief, the time is 10:30 a.m. Is this knowledge? Let us check our three parts. Do you believe it is 10:30? Yes. Is it true that it is 10:30? Yes, by pure coincidence. But, is your belief justified? No. Your justification is that you looked at a clock, but you were looking at a broken clock. Your justification is faulty. You just got lucky. You had a justified true belief, but the justification itself was not connected to the truth in the right way. This is called the Gettier problem, and it shows how complex the idea of justification can be. For our purposes, as we rest, let us understand justification as simply a good reason. The major debate in epistemology, the great dividing line, is about this very idea. What counts as a good reason? Where does our justification come from? This debate gives us the two great schools of thought in epistemology. The first school is called rationalism. Rationalists argue that our most important knowledge, our deepest justification, comes from pure reason and logic. They believe that the mind, by itself, has the capacity to discover truths about the world, independent of our five senses. The most famous rationalist was the French philosopher René Descartes. He lived in the 1600s, a time of great scientific and religious change. He wanted to find a foundation for knowledge that was so certain it could not possibly be doubted. To do this, he began a process called the method of doubt. He decided to doubt everything he thought he knew to see if anything was left. First, he doubted his senses. He reasoned that his senses sometimes deceive him. A stick in water looks bent, but it is straight. He could be dreaming right now. and in his dream, everything would feel perfectly real. So, he could not trust his senses for certainty. He then doubted even the truths of mathematics. He imagined that a powerful, evil demon could be deceiving him, making him think that 2 plus 2 equals 4, when it really does not. He was left with nothing. But then, in this void of absolute doubt, he found his one, unshakable certainty. He realized that he was doubting. In the very act of doubting, he had to be thinking. And if he was thinking, he must exist. He wrote the famous phrase, cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. This was his foundation. He did not need his senses to prove this. He did not need to see or touch or hear. He knew he existed as a thinking thing through an act of pure reason alone. For the rationalist, this is the highest form of knowledge. The second great school of thought is called empiricism. Empiricists argue the opposite. They believe that all knowledge, or almost all knowledge, comes from sensory experience. The key figure for empiricism was the English philosopher John Locke. Locke argued that the human mind at birth is a tabula rasa, a Latin phrase meaning blank slate. Imagine an empty piece of paper. For Locke, this is the mind of a newborn. It has no innate ideas. It has no built-in knowledge of God, or mathematics, or the self. How, then, does it fill up? It fills up, Locke said, through experience, the senses, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. Pour simple ideas into the mind. An infant sees the color yellow. It tastes the sweetness of milk. It feels the softness of a blanket. These are simple ideas. The mind then takes these simple ideas and combines them, reflects on them, to build complex ideas. The mind combines yellow, sweet, round, and fuzzy to form the complex idea of a peach. For an empiricist, all our knowledge is a posteriori, a phrase that means after experience. You cannot know what a peach tastes like through pure reason. You must experience it. These two great traditions, rationalism and empiricism, are not just abstract puzzles. They shape our world. The scientific method is the most powerful system of empiricism ever created. It is a formal process for testing our ideas against the world. Through observation, experimentation, and the gathering of sensory data, it is a system built on the belief that experience is the final judge of truth. At the same time, fields like pure mathematics and computer programming are deeply rational. The truth that 1 plus 1 equals 2 is not a truth we discover by observing the world. It is an a priori truth, a truth of logic, that we understand with our reason. In our daily lives, we are a blend of both. We use our reason to organize, categorize, and understand the flood of data that our senses provide us. We are both rationalists and empiricists. We have now explored epistemology. We have defined knowledge as justified true belief. And we have examined the two great sources of that justification, the pure reason of the rationalist and the sensory experience of the empiricist. We have now considered how we know. We have our tools of justification. With these tools in hand, our reason and our senses, we are finally ready to ask the first great question of philosophy. We are ready to turn our attention from our own minds to the world outside. We can now ask, what is real? What is this universe that we are trying to know? This question brings us directly to our next lesson. Our next step in this quiet journey is into the branch of metaphysics, the study of reality. In our previous lesson, we explored epistemology, the study of knowledge. We examined the tools we use to understand our world, our reason, and our senses. We now have our foundation for how we know. The time has come to use these tools. We are ready to turn our gaze outward, from the knower to the known, from our minds to the universe they inhabit. We can now ask the first, and perhaps the largest, of all philosophical questions. What is real? This brings us to our third lesson, metaphysics, the study of reality. Let the word metaphysics gently enter your mind. It is another word that comes to us from the ancient Greeks. It is composed of two parts. The first part is meta, which means beyond or after. The second part is physics, which refers to the physical, natural world, the world of objects, energy, and motion. Metaphysics, therefore, is the study of what lies beyond the physical. It is the branch of philosophy that deals with the first principles of things, the fundamental nature of reality. As you rest, as you sink deeper into comfort, allow your mind to just touch upon these questions. There is no need to answer them, simply observe them. What is the world ultimately made of? What does it mean for something to be or to exist? What is time? What is space? Is the world around you the only reality, or is it a part of something larger, something unseen? For centuries, the answers to these vast questions have tended to fall into two great opposing categories. This is the central debate of metaphysics. The first view is called materialism, or sometimes physicalism. Materialism is the belief that only physical matter is real. It is a form of monism, from the Greek word mono, meaning one. Materialism proposes that there is only one kind of substance in the universe, and that substance is physical. From this perspective, everything you see, touch, and experience, the bed you are in, the air you are breathing, the moon in the sky, and even your own brain, are all composed of physical stuff: atoms, molecules, energy. A materialist would argue that the things we cannot see, our thoughts, our feelings, our consciousness, our idea of justice or love, are not separate, non-physical things. Instead, they are the result of physical processes. Your thoughts are the product of the complex electrochemical activity in your brain. Consciousness, from this view, is a biological process. Just as digestion is a biological process, it is what the brain does. The second, and opposing, view is called dualism. Dualism, from the Latin word duo, meaning two, is the belief that two fundamental kinds of reality exist. Dualism proposes that the universe is made of both physical substance, matter, and a second, non-physical substance. This non-physical reality might be called mind, or soul, or spirit. From this perspective, your brain is a physical object, but your mind, your consciousness, your self, is something separate from the brain. It is an immaterial thing that inhabits and interacts with the physical body. This idea was most famously articulated by René Descartes, whom we met in our last lesson. Descartes was a substance dualist. He was certain that he existed as a thinking thing, the res cogitans, and that this thinking self was a completely different substance from his physical body, which he called the extended thing, or res extensa. But perhaps the most profound version of dualism in history comes from the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. Plato, the student of Socrates, proposed a dualism not just for human beings, but for the entire universe. He suggested that the physical world we perceive with our senses is not the true reality. In fact, he described it as a world of shadows. Plato's theory of forms is one of the most influential ideas in Western thought. He asked us to imagine people who have lived their entire lives chained in a deep cave, facing a flat wall. Behind them, a fire burns, and between the fire and the prisoners, other people walk by, carrying objects. These objects cast shadows on the wall in front of the prisoners. For these prisoners, the shadows are reality. They have never seen anything else. They would name the shadows, study their movements, and believe their entire world was composed of these flickering, flat images. Plato argued that we, in our daily lives, are like those prisoners. The physical world we see, hear, and touch is like those shadows. It is an imperfect, changing and decaying copy of a higher, more perfect and eternal reality. This higher reality, Plato called the world of forms, or the world of ideas. In this non-physical, immaterial realm, there exists the perfect, unchanging idea, or form, of all things. There is a perfect form of chair, a perfect form of tree, and also perfect forms of justice, truth, and beauty. Every physical chair you have ever seen, Plato would say, is just an imperfect shadow, a flawed copy of that one perfect idea of a chair. For Plato, the idea, the form, was more real than the physical object. The physical world is fleeting. The world of forms is eternal. This is a powerful, dualistic vision of reality. It places true being, true existence, in a realm that is completely beyond our physical senses. A realm we can only access, Plato argued, through our reason. A materialist, of course, would disagree. A materialist would look at Plato's forms and say that these ideas are not out there in some other world, they are in here, inside our physical brains. We see many different chairs, and our brain creates an abstract concept, a category, which we call chair. For the materialist, the physical objects come first. The idea is just a description. This debate between materialism and dualism is not just an abstract game for ancient philosophers. It is a living question, and it informs our world today. The entire project of modern science, physics, chemistry, neuroscience, is built largely on a materialist assumption. Science seeks physical causes for physical effects. It is a method for studying the material world. But this assumption is challenged by the problem of consciousness. The very thing you are using to listen to my voice is your subjective feeling of happiness, your experience of the color red, your memory of a childhood home, nothing more than a pattern of neurons firing. Science can show us the correlation, which parts of the brain light up, but it has not yet explained the experience itself. This question is also at the very heart of artificial intelligence research. Can we, one day, build a machine, a computer, that is truly conscious? Can a machine made only of physical parts, silicon, plastic, and metal, to wake up? A strong materialist might say yes. If consciousness is just a very complex physical process, then a sufficiently complex machine could, in theory, replicate that process and become conscious. A dualist, however, would say, no. A machine, no matter how clever, will always be just a machine. It could simulate thinking, it could imitate feeling, but it will never truly be conscious because it lacks the essential non-physical ingredient, the mind or the soul. And so, this ancient question, what is real, remains the most modern question we have. We have now explored the stage of reality, our metaphysics. We have our epistemology, the tools for understanding it. We have a place to stand and a way to see. With this foundation, we can now apply our thinking to a more practical, human question. Given this reality, whatever it may be, and given our place in it, how should we behave? How should we act toward one another? This brings us to the third great branch of philosophy. We now move from the is to the ought. We now enter the field of ethics. Introduction to Ethics and Moral Philosophy. In our lessons so far, we have built our foundation. We began with epistemology, the study of knowledge, to understand how we can know. Then, we explored metaphysics, the study of reality, to ask what exists. We have built the stage, and we have established our ability to perceive it. Now, we place ourselves upon that stage. We move from the questions of what is to the profound question of what ought to be. Given this reality and our place within it, how should we live? how should we behave toward one another? This brings us to our fourth lesson, Introduction to Ethics and Moral Philosophy. As you continue to rest, allow these concepts to wash over you. There is no need to grasp them tightly, just allow them to be present. The words ethics and morality are often used interchangeably, and for good reason. They are the twin pillars of this field. The word ethics comes to us from the ancient Greek word ethos. Ethos means character, custom, or habit. It is the study of our character and the habits that form it. The word morality comes from the Latin word mores, which means almost exactly the same thing: customs, habits, the way people act. So, ethics, or moral philosophy, is the systematic study of right and wrong conduct. It is the branch of philosophy that involves systematizing, defending, and recommending concepts of right and wrong behavior. It is our attempt to find a rational guide for our actions. When you ask, what is the right thing to do, you are asking a question of ethics. When you wonder, am I a good person, you are engaging in moral philosophy. This field of study is vast. To navigate it, philosophers have made a very important primary distinction. They have divided the study of morality into two main areas. The first area is called descriptive ethics. As the name suggests, this branch simply describes what people do believe is right or wrong. It does not make any judgments. It does not say this is good or this is bad. It is like the work of an anthropologist, a sociologist, or a historian. A descriptive ethicist might travel to a different culture and write a report. The people of this society believe that sharing all property in common is morally good. Or they might study a historical period and report. In this era, it was considered morally obligatory to duel for one's honor. This is the is of morality. It is a factual report on the mores, the customs, of a people. It simply states what is. The second, and much larger, area is called normative ethics. This is what most of us think of when we hear the word philosophy. Where descriptive ethics focuses on is, normative ethics focuses on ought. The word normative comes from the word norm, which means a standard or a rule. Normative ethics tries to establish a standard. It is not interested in what people happen to believe. It is interested in what people should believe. It seeks to find the true, rational principles that should guide our actions. When we ask the big questions, is it always wrong to lie? Is it ever right to steal? What is justice? We are asking questions of normative ethics. We are searching for a norm, a guiding rule. Pause. Let that distinction settle in. Descriptive ethics describes what is. Normative ethics prescribes what ought to be. There is even a third, deeper level, which we call meta-ethics. Meta means beyond or about. Meta-ethics does not ask what is good. It asks, what does the word good even mean? It is the philosophy about ethics itself. It asks questions like, do moral truths exist objectively, like the laws of physics? Or is morality just a matter of personal feeling or cultural opinion? When we say murder is wrong, are we stating a fact about the universe, or are we just expressing our emotional disapproval? For our journey, as we learn to sleep, we will focus primarily on normative ethics. We will join the great philosophers in the search for a guide to a good life. And in this search, over the course of centuries, three great families of thought, three main pathways, have emerged. These are the three primary frameworks for answering the question, what makes an action right or wrong? Let your mind rest on these three approaches. The first approach is virtue ethics. This framework focuses on the person, the moral agent. It does not begin by asking, what should I do? It begins by asking, what kind of person should I be? The focus here is on character. A good action is one that a person of good character, a virtuous person, would perform. This theory is about cultivating virtues like courage, honesty, compassion, and justice. The goal is to become a good person, and right actions will naturally follow. The second approach is deontology. This framework focuses on the action itself. The word deon is Greek for duty. Deontology argues that certain actions are inherently right or wrong, regardless of their consequences. Morality is a matter of following universal rules or duties. For a deontologist, lying is wrong because it is lying, not because of the good or bad results it might produce. It is about your intention and the rule you are following. The third approach is consequentialism. This framework focuses, as the name implies, on the consequences, the outcomes of an action. Consequentialism argues that the right action is the one that produces the best overall result. The ends, in a sense, justify the means. An action is not inherently right or wrong. It is made right or wrong by the amount of good or happiness or well-being it produces in the world. Let those three ideas settle. 3 ways to look at a moral choice. Do you look at the person acting? That is virtue ethics. Do you look at the action itself? That is deontology. Do you look at the result of the action? That is consequentialism. These are not just abstract categories in a textbook. You use these 3 frameworks all the time, whether you are aware of it or not. When you admire a friend for their unwavering honesty, even when it's difficult, you are thinking like a virtue ethicist. You are admiring their character. When you feel that breaking a promise is wrong, even if it would lead to a better outcome, you are thinking like a deontologist. You are respecting a duty, a rule. And when you decide where to donate money, by researching which charity will do the most good and help the most people, you are thinking like a consequentialist. You are focused on maximizing the best outcome. Ethics is not a separate, isolated subject. It is the very fabric of our lives. It is the foundation of our laws, our professions, and our relationships. Our entire legal system is a constant debate between these frameworks, trying to balance a person's intent, the nature of their act, and the harm that it caused. Our personal lives are a quiet, continuous practice of moral philosophy. We have now introduced this great branch of study. We have distinguished between what people do believe and what they ought to believe. And we have outlined the 3 great paths philosophers have taken to find that ought: the path of character, the path of duty, and the path of consequences. To understand them, we must walk down each path, one by one, and it is only right that we begin with the oldest of these paths. Before philosophers asked, "What are the rules?" they asked a simpler, more personal question. We begin our next lesson by exploring that first framework, the one that asks not, "What should I do?" but "What kind of person should I be?" This brings us to our next lesson: virtue ethics, character, and flourishing. In our last lesson, we began our exploration of normative ethics, the search for a guide to right action. We saw that this search has taken philosophers down 3 great paths. We have now walked down the first and oldest of these paths. Welcome to our 5th lesson: virtue ethics, character, and flourishing. As you continue to relax, as you settle deeper into a state of rest, let your mind turn inward. This first framework is not concerned with the consequences of your actions, nor is it concerned with a list of external rules you must follow. Instead, this framework centers on you. It focuses on the agent, of the moral actor. It is a philosophy centered on character. Virtue ethics asks the most personal of all moral questions: what kind of person should I be? It proposes that a moral life is not about memorizing a rule book or calculating outcomes. It is about the long, slow, and deliberate process of becoming a good person. From this perspective, a right action is simply the action that a person of good character, a virtuous person, would perform in the same situation. This leads us to the central concept of this philosophy. What is a virtue? A virtue is a positive character trait. It is an excellence of the soul. When we speak of virtues, we are using words that are very familiar to us. Words like courage, honesty, justice, compassion, generosity, and temperance. A virtue is not a passing feeling, nor is it a single isolated act. It is a disposition, a deep-seated, reliable tendency to think, to feel, and to act in a certain excellent way. It is a good habit that has become so ingrained, so practiced, that it is a fundamental part of who you are. And what is the purpose of cultivating these virtues? The ancient Greeks, who perfected this philosophy, had a specific word for the goal. The goal is to achieve eudaimonia. This is a vital concept. Eu means good, and daimon means spirit or self. So eudaimonia literally means having a good spirit. But the best translation, the one for you to hold gently in your mind, is human flourishing. For the virtue ethicist, the purpose of life is to live a life of human flourishing. It is a life of well-being, of meaning, of excellence, of realizing your full potential as a human being. The virtues are not just a means to this end. The virtues are the ingredients. A life of courage, honesty, justice, and compassion is a flourishing life. The most important and influential figure in this tradition is the philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle, who lived in the 4th century BC, was a student of Plato. He was a practical and observational thinker. He looked at the world around him, at the people in his city, and he asked a biologist's question: what makes for an excellent human life? What is our function, and how can we perform it well? In his great work, The Nicomachean Ethics, he laid out his answer. First, Aristotle argued, no one is born virtuous. You are not born courageous or honest or just. It is not an innate gift. Rather, virtue is a skill, an art. And like any art, whether it is learning to play a musical instrument or becoming a master carpenter, it must be learned through practice and habit. This process is called habituation. You become a virtuous person, Aristotle taught, by doing virtuous things over and over again. You become brave by practicing brave acts. You become generous by performing generous deeds. At first, this might be difficult. It might require conscious effort, but through repetition, the action becomes a habit. As the habit strengthens, it sinks deeper into your character, until it is no longer just something you do. It becomes a part of who you are. The goal is to reach a state where you naturally know the right thing to do, at the right time, in the right way, and for the right reason, and where you want to do it. You have so trained your character that your desires are aligned with your reason. This leads to Aristotle's most famous and practical concept, the golden mean. Aristotle observed that in almost every part of life, the virtue, the excellence, is not an extreme. It is a perfect balance, a mean or a middle ground that lies between two extremes. These two extremes are both vices or faults. One vice is a vice of deficiency, which is too little of the quality. The other is a vice of excess, which is too much. Let us use a clear example. Consider the virtue of courage. What is the vice of deficiency, or too little? It is cowardice. This is the person who is ruled by their fear. They fail to act when they should. Now, what is the vice of excess, or too much? This is recklessness, or foolhardiness. This is the person who feels too little fear, or who acts rashly, charging into danger without thought. This is also a vice. The virtue, true courage, is the golden mean. It is the balance between these two. The courageous person is not someone who feels no fear. The courageous person feels the appropriate amount of fear, but they act in spite of it, governed by reason, to achieve a noble goal. Let us take one more example, the virtue of generosity. The vice of deficiency is stinginess. This is the person who hoards their resources, unwilling to share. The vice of excess is profligacy or wastefulness. This is the person who gives away everything, thoughtlessly, to the point of self-ruin. The virtue, true generosity, is the golden mean. It is the person who has the wisdom to know how to give, what to give, to whom to give, and when to give. It is a thoughtful, rational, and appropriate giving that balances one's own needs with the needs of others. For Aristotle, living a moral life is a work of art. It requires finding this perfect mean again and again in every situation. This requires not just rules, but a special kind of wisdom he called phronesis, or practical wisdom. It is the wisdom to see the situation clearly, to understand what is truly at stake, and to find the virtuous path. This ancient philosophy is not just a historical curiosity. We use virtue ethics all the time. When you think about the people you admire most in your life, your role models, mentors, or heroes, you are often thinking in terms of virtue. You do not admire them simply because they followed a specific rule one time, or because they caused one good outcome. You admire them for who they are, for their integrity, their kindness, their resilience, their honesty. You are admiring their character. When we are raising children, we are practicing virtue ethics. We do not just teach a child, the rule is, do not lie. We try to teach them to be an honest person. We try to cultivate the habit of honesty. The beauty of virtue ethics is its focus on the whole person, on the long journey of becoming. It does not judge you for a single mistake. Instead, it asks, what did you learn from this? How can you use this experience to build a better, stronger, more virtuous character? It is a demanding philosophy. It tells us that morality is not easy. It is not a simple checklist. It is a complex skill, like learning to play the violin. It requires daily practice, self-reflection, and a lifetime of dedication to becoming a better, more flourishing human being. We have now explored this first path, the path of inner character. We have seen that it is about being, not just doing. But this philosophy leaves us with important questions. While virtue ethics focuses on our inner selves, on our dispositions, other philosophers argued that this is not enough. What if a person has a good character, but still does not know what to do in a complex situation? What if we need clear, unshakable rules to guide our actions, rules that apply to everyone, regardless of their character? This brings us to the second great path. We must now turn away from the inner world of character and toward the outer world of moral law and absolute duties. This brings us to our next lesson, deontology, duty-based ethics. In our last lesson, we walked the first great path of ethics. We explored virtue ethics, a philosophy that turns its gaze inward, focusing on the development of our moral character. It is the path of being a good person, a journey of cultivating virtues like courage and honesty over a lifetime. It is a beautiful and profound tradition, but it leaves us with challenging questions. How do we know what a virtuous person would do in a truly new or difficult situation? Is character, by itself, enough of a guide? What if we need something more solid, more objective? What if we need clear, unshakable rules that apply to everyone, in every situation? This brings us to the second great path of normative ethics. We now turn from the inner world of character to the outer world of moral law. Welcome to our sixth lesson, deontology, duty-based ethics. Let this word, deontology, rest in your mind. It is another word from the Greeks. It comes from the word deon, which simply means duty. Deontology is the ethical theory that morality is based on duties, rules, and obligations. This framework proposes that certain actions are inherently right or wrong in and of themselves. The morality of an action is not based on the character of the person doing it, nor is it based on the consequences or results of the action. The morality is found in the action itself, in the kind of action it is. For a deontologist, some things are right and some things are wrong, period. There is a set of moral rules, and our duty is to follow them. For example, a deontologist would argue that lying is wrong, not because it might harm people, and not because an honest person wouldn't do it, but simply because the act of lying, by its very nature, is a violation of a moral duty. The goal here is not to become a good person or to produce a good outcome. The goal is to do the right thing. The single most important figure in the history of deontology, the man who built this entire system of thought, was the 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant was a man of incredible intellect and precise routine. He lived during the Age of Enlightenment, a time when scientists like Isaac Newton were discovering the universal, unbreakable laws that govern the physical world, laws like gravity. Kant was deeply impressed by this. He wondered if the physical universe operates according to such perfect, rational, universal laws. Could morality also be based on laws just as universal and certain? He rejected the idea that morality could come from tradition, or from religion, or from our feelings. Emotions, he argued, are fickle and unreliable. He wanted to find a foundation for morality that was based on the one thing he believed all human beings share, our capacity for reason. He wanted to build a moral system from the ground up, using logic alone. And he did. He called his foundational principle the categorical imperative. This is the very heart of Kant's philosophy. Imperative means it is a command. Categorical means it is absolute and unconditional. It applies to everyone, at all times, in all situations, with no exceptions. Kant offered a few different ways of wording this one great law. We will explore two of them. The first formulation, and the most famous, is the principle of universalizability. Kant wrote, "Act only according to that maxim, that rule, whereby you can, at the same time, will that it should become a universal law." This sounds complex, but the idea is actually quite simple. It is a logical test for any action you are considering. First, figure out the maxim, or the simple rule, that you would be following if you took the action. Second, imagine what the world would be like if that rule became a universal law of nature, like gravity, that everyone had to follow. Finally, ask, is there a logical contradiction in that world? Let us use Kant's own classic example, making a false promise. Imagine you are in a difficult situation and you need to borrow money. You know you cannot pay it back, but you also know that your friend will only lend you the money if you promise to pay it back. You are tempted to make a lying promise. What is your maxim? The rule you are following is, when it is convenient for me, I will make a promise that I have no intention of keeping. Now, let's universalize it. Imagine a world where everyone follows this rule. Everyone makes false promises whenever it is convenient. What happens? A logical contradiction is created. In this new world, the very concept of a promise would cease to exist. No one would believe a promise. The word promise would become meaningless. Therefore, your original maxim, your plan to lie, becomes impossible. Your lie only works because you are assuming that most people are telling the truth. You are making an exception for yourself. Because the maxim self-destructs when universalized, Kant says, it is an irrational and immoral action. It is a violation of your duty. For Kant, this proves that lying is always wrong. This brings us to Kant's second formulation of the categorical imperative, one that many find more powerful. This is the principle of humanity. Kant wrote, "Act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in your own person or in the person of any other, always at the same time as an end, and never merely as a means to an end." What does it mean to treat someone as a means versus an end. We use people as a means all the time. When you buy food from a cashier, you are using them as a means to get your food. They are using you as a means to get their paycheck. This, Kant says, is fine, as long as you are also treating them as an end. You are treating them with respect. You are both consenting to the transaction. You are honoring their rational autonomy. To treat someone merely as a means, as just a tool, is the ultimate moral violation. It is to use them in a way they could not or would not rationally consent to. Let us return to the lying promise. When you lie to your friend to get money, you are treating them merely as a means. You are treating them as an obstacle, a wallet, not as a person. You are overriding their autonomy, their right to make their own, informed choice. By feeding them false information, you are using them as a tool for your own goals. For Kant, this formulation is the source of all human dignity and all human rights. Because we are rational, autonomous beings, beings who can set our own goals, we have an inherent, infinite worth. We are ends in ourselves. We must not be treated as mere objects or tools. This deontological framework, this duty-based thinking, is a massive part of our modern world. The entire concept of universal human rights is a deontological idea. It is the belief that every person has inherent dignity, and that certain actions, like torture or slavery or genocide, are always wrong, absolutely. Regardless of any potential good consequences, we are saying that these actions violate a universal duty to respect human dignity. Our professional codes are often deontological. A doctor's oath to do no harm is a rule, a duty, that is not supposed to be broken, even if it might lead to what seems like a better outcome. Legal ethics, the duty of a lawyer to maintain client confidentiality, is a rule-based system. Even the simple, everyday act of keeping a promise, even when it is inconvenient, that is a deontological act. You are acting out of a sense of duty, not because of the consequences. Kant's system is rational, consistent, and provides a powerful foundation for human rights. But it is also famously rigid. It leaves us with a difficult, unsettling question. Kant argued that consequences do not matter at all. But what if they do? What about the classic white lie to spare someone's feelings? Kant would say it is wrong. What about the even more famous scenario? You are hiding an innocent person in your home. A murderer comes to the door and asks, "Is that person here?" Kant's philosophy seems to demand that you cannot lie. You must tell the truth. This feels deeply wrong to many people. It seems that, in this case, the consequences of the action, saving a life, are far more important than the rule about lying. Kant argued that the rules matter most. But what if the results are the only thing that matters? What if the only thing we should be looking at is the outcome of our choices? This brings us to the third and final great path of ethics. We now must explore the theory that judges an action, not by the character of the person, not by the rule it follows, but purely by the results it produces. This leads us to our next lesson: consequentialism and utilitarianism. Consequentialism and utilitarianism. In our last two lessons, we have walked two of the three great paths of moral philosophy. We began with virtue ethics, the inward path, focusing on the cultivation of a virtuous character. Then, we explored deontology, the path of duty, which gave us a rigid and rational system of universal moral rules based not on outcomes, but on the action itself. This deontological path, championed by Immanuel Kant, gave us a powerful foundation for human rights. But it also left us with a deep-seated discomfort. It told us that consequences do not matter, that we must not lie, even to save an innocent life. This strikes many of us as a flaw. It feels, intuitively, as if the results of our actions must matter. And so, we arrive at the third and final great path of normative ethics. This framework sets aside our inner character and ignores any sense of absolute duty. It looks at only one thing, the bottom line. Welcome to our seventh lesson, consequentialism and utilitarianism. As you continue to relax, as your breathing slows, let this simple idea settle in your mind. The word consequentialism tells you everything you need to know. It is the ethical theory that the consequences, the outcomes of an action, are the only standard for judging whether that action is right or wrong. From this perspective, there are no bad actions or good actions in themselves. An action is made right or wrong only by the results it produces. The ends, in a very real sense, do justify the means. A morally right action is simply the one that produces the best overall outcome. This immediately raises the most important question. What is the best outcome? How do we measure the good? There are many answers to this, but one answer has been so influential, so powerful, that it has come to define the entire theory. This is the philosophy of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism defines the best outcome in a very specific way. The best, most moral, most right action is the one that produces the greatest good for the greatest number of people. And what is this good that we are meant to maximize? For utilitarians, the answer is simple: happiness. The good is happiness, or well-being, or pleasure. The bad is unhappiness, or suffering, or pain. Therefore, the core principle of utilitarianism, the one great rule, is to act in a way that maximizes total happiness and minimizes total suffering for everyone involved. This idea was founded and formalized by the 18th century English philosopher and social reformer Jeremy Bentham. Bentham was a man of the Enlightenment, just like Kant. But where Kant was a man of abstract principles, Bentham was a man of practical, scientific calculation. He wanted to make morality a science. He wanted to create a system for weighing happiness. He called this system the hedonic calculus, or sometimes the felicific calculus. He argued that we could and should literally calculate the moral worth of an action. We could measure the pleasure and pain it would produce. We would measure its intensity. How strong is the pleasure? We would measure its duration. How long will it last? We would measure its certainty. How likely is it to happen? And we would measure its extent. How many people will be affected? For Bentham, you would add up all the units of pleasure on one side, add up all the units of pain on the other, and the right action would be the one with the highest positive score. For Bentham, all pleasures were equal. The pleasure of playing a simple child's game was just as good as the pleasure of listening to a great symphony, as long as the quantity of pleasure was the same. This focus on pleasure led to a famous criticism that utilitarianism was a doctrine worthy only of swine. Critics said it reduced human life to the simple, animalistic pursuit of base pleasures. This criticism was answered by Bentham's student and perhaps the most famous utilitarian of all, John Stuart Mill. Mill was a brilliant philosopher who agreed with the core principle: we should maximize happiness. But he refined the theory. He made a crucial distinction that saved it from this criticism. Mill argued that we must consider not just the quantity of pleasure, but also its quality. He argued that there are higher pleasures and lower pleasures. Lower pleasures are those of the body, the pleasures we share with animals, such as eating, drinking, and physical sensation. Higher pleasures are those of the mind and of the heart. They are the pleasures of intellect, of creativity, of moral feeling, and of art. Mill argued that these higher pleasures are intrinsically more valuable than the lower ones. In his most famous passage, he wrote, "It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. A fool or a pig might be perfectly content with their lower pleasures, but Socrates, the thinking human, has experienced the higher pleasures and understands their superior worth. For Mill, the goal is not just any happiness, but the highest and richest form of human flourishing for the greatest number. This entire framework, this moral calculation, is best illustrated by a famous thought experiment known as the trolley problem. Imagine you are standing by a set of railway tracks. In the distance, you see a runaway trolley, a train car, speeding down the track, out of control. Ahead of the trolley, there are 5 people tied to the track, unable to move. You are standing next to a lever. If you pull this lever, you will divert the trolley onto a different track. But on this other track, there is one person tied up. You have a choice. Do nothing, and 5 people will die. Pull the lever, and 1 person will die, but 5 will be saved. What is the right thing to do? For a pure utilitarian, the answer is clear, if tragic. You must pull the lever. The calculation is simple and cold. 5 lives are worth more than 1 life. Pulling the lever produces the greatest good for the greatest number. It maximizes survival. This mode of thinking, this cost-benefit analysis, is not just a game. It is perhaps the most common form of ethical reasoning used in the public world. Governments use utilitarian logic every single day. When a city council decides whether to spend its budget on building a new hospital for the many or a new sports stadium for a smaller group, they are making a utilitarian calculation. They are trying to determine which project will produce the greatest good for the greatest number of citizens. Doctors in an emergency room or medics on a battlefield practice triage. They must make terrible, split-second decisions, prioritizing patients who are most likely to survive. Sometimes having to leave 1 person to die in order to save 3 others. This is a painful, real-world application of utilitarianism. This philosophy is logical, practical, and it appeals to our common-sense intuition that consequences do matter. But it also has a dark side, one that leaves us deeply uneasy. The trolley problem itself has a disturbing variation. Imagine, again, the trolley speeding toward the 5 people. This time, there is no lever. You are standing on a bridge over the track, and next to you is a very large man. You know with certainty that if you were to push this one man off the bridge and onto the track below, his body would be large enough to stop the trolley, saving the 5 people. But he, of course, would die. The math is identical. Sacrifice 1 to save 5. But for most people, this action feels completely different. It feels like murder. A pure utilitarian might be forced to say you should push the man. But this violates our deep-seated, perhaps deontological, feeling that it is inherently wrong to use a person, to treat them as a mere tool, even for a greater good. And this is the great challenge of utilitarianism. It can, in theory, justify sacrificing an innocent individual or a minority group for the sake of the majority. We have now surveyed all 3 great frameworks for how to act: virtue ethics, the path of character; deontology, the path of duty; and consequentialism, the path of results. Let this information settle. You have seen the strengths and weaknesses of each. You have gathered the tools of moral thought. As you drift deeper, as you let this learning become a part of you, we will now pivot. We have spent our time on the question of action. We will now return to the question of the self. We must now explore the agent who makes these choices. What is this mind that weighs virtues, follows duties, and calculates consequences? We now enter one of the most mysterious and fascinating fields in all of philosophy. Our next lesson is titled The Philosophy of Mind, the Mind-Body Problem. We have now completed our journey through the 3 great paths of moral philosophy. We have explored virtue ethics, the path of character; deontology, the path of duty; and consequentialism, the path of results. We have spent our time on the fundamental question of action. How should we behave? Now, as you continue to rest, as you drift deeper, we will make a profound shift. We will turn our gaze away from the actions we perform and turn it, instead, toward the agent who performs them. Who or what is this self that makes these moral choices? What is this mind that weighs virtues, follows duties, and calculates the consequences? We now enter one of the most mysterious and fascinating fields in all of philosophy. Welcome to our 8th lesson, the philosophy of mind, the mind-body problem. This is perhaps the most personal question in all of metaphysics. It is a question about your own immediate first-hand experience of being alive. The mind-body problem is the central, enduring question of this field. It asks, what is the relationship between your mind and your body? More specifically, what is the relationship between the non-physical inner world of your consciousness? Your thoughts, your feelings, your memories, your beliefs, your sensation of being you, and the physical, biological machine of your body, specifically your brain? Are they the same thing? Or are they two completely different things that somehow, miraculously, interact? This is the puzzle. You feel like a unified being. You decide to raise your hand, a non-physical thought, and your physical hand moves, a physical event. Like touching a hot stove, task causes a non-physical feeling of pain in your mind. How does this happen? How does the ghost interact with the machine? For centuries, the answers to this problem have been divided into two major, opposing camps. The first, and perhaps the most intuitive answer, is dualism. As we learned in our lesson on metaphysics, dualism is the belief that two fundamental kinds of reality exist. In this context, it is the belief that the mind and the body are two completely different, separate substances. The classic formulation of this idea comes from the philosopher we have met before, René Descartes. Descartes, as you recall, was certain of one thing: I think, therefore I am. He was certain that he existed as a res cogens, a thinking thing. He was also certain that he had a body, a res extensa, or an extended thing, a physical object that took up space. But for Descartes, these two things were not the same. He argued that his mind, his self, was a non-physical, non-spatial, indivisible soul. His body, on the other hand, was a physical, spatial, and divisible machine. He could imagine his mind existing without his body. Therefore, he reasoned, they must be two different things. This, of course, creates the single biggest problem for dualism, a puzzle that has haunted it for centuries, the interaction problem. If the mind is non-physical, a ghost, and the body is physical, a machine, how do they connect? How does the ghostly decision cause the physical arm to move? How does a physical pinprick cause a ghostly feeling of pain? By what mechanism does the immaterial affect the material? Descartes himself struggled with this. He made a hypothesis, a guess, that this magical interaction happened in a tiny, single structure in the center of the brain called the pineal gland. This was the one part of the brain he mistakenly thought was not duplicated, and so it seemed like a good candidate for the seat of the soul. This explanation, of course, does not really solve the problem, it just gives the magic a location. Now, let us turn to the other great camp, the one that dominates most of modern science and philosophy. This view is materialism, or physicalism. Materialism, as you remember, is a form of monism. It is the belief that only one kind of substance exists, and that substance is physical matter. From a materialist perspective, the mind-body problem is not a problem at all. There is no problem of interaction. because there are not two different things. For a materialist, the mind is the brain. There is no ghost in the machine. There is only the machine. What we call the mind, our thoughts, our feelings, our memories, our consciousness, is not a separate, spooky substance. It is simply the activity of the brain. It is the name we give to the incredibly complex, high-level biological process of information processing, of trillions of neurons firing in complex electrochemical patterns. A thought, for a materialist, is a physical event in the brain. A feeling of joy is a specific cascade of neurotransmitters. The self is a complex model that the brain builds to represent its own body and its place in the world. This view solves the interaction problem completely. A thought, a brain state, causes an action, another brain state that sends a signal, because it is all one, unbroken physical chain of cause and effect, just like one domino hitting another. This materialist view is the guiding assumption of neuroscience. When a scientist studies the brain, when they map which parts of the brain light up when you feel fear, or solve a puzzle, or recognize a face, they are operating as materialists. They are looking for the physical explanation for a mental event. We see evidence for this everywhere in medicine. We know that physical damage to the brain, from an injury or a stroke, can profoundly change a person's mind. It can alter their personality, erase their memories, or change their moral compass. This suggests a deep causal link, that the mind is dependent on the physical brain. This ancient debate is also the single most important question at the heart of artificial intelligence. Can we build a mind? Can a machine, made only of physical parts, silicon chips, wires, and electricity, to one day wake up? A dualist, like Descartes, would say absolutely not. A machine, no matter how complex, is just a physical object. It can simulate thinking, it can imitate feeling, but it will never have a real, non-physical mind or soul. It will be an empty shell. A strong materialist, however, might say, yes, if the mind is just a product of complex information processing, and if our brains are just very, very complex biological computers, then it is theoretically possible that a non-biological computer, if it became complex enough, could replicate that same process. It could, in theory, be conscious. The materialist view seems to have the upper hand in science. It is practical, it avoids supernatural explanations, and it leads to testable predictions. But it leaves us, as you rest here, in the quiet, with the single greatest mystery of all. If we are just a physical machine, if the mind is just the firing of neurons, then how does it feel? How does a purely physical chemical process in the dark, silent skull create the subjective, inner experience of being you? How does it create the feeling of sadness, the experience of the color red, the sound of music, the taste of sugar? This is the great puzzle. This is the mystery of consciousness itself. This leads us directly to our next, and perhaps most profound, lesson. We must now dive deeper into this mystery. We will now explore the hard problem of consciousness. In our previous lesson, we confronted the great mind-body problem. We explored the divide between the physical brain to a complex, biological machine and the non-physical mind, our inner world. We ended with the most difficult question of all. If we accept the materialist view that the mind is the brain, we are left with a profound mystery. How does a purely physical chemical process, a collection of neurons firing in the dark, silent vault of the skull, create the feeling of being alive? How does matter wake up? We now dive deeper into this central mystery. Welcome to our 9th lesson, Theories of Consciousness. There is no need to concentrate. There is nothing to solve. simply rest and let these ideas be present in your mind. First, let us define what we mean by consciousness. We do not just mean being awake as opposed to being asleep. We mean something far more fundamental. Consciousness is your subjective awareness. It is your private, first-person, inner life. It is the experience of the color red. It is the sound of a melody in your mind. It is the feeling of warmth, the taste of salt, the sting of sadness, or the glow of joy. Philosophers have a special word for these raw, subjective, qualitative experiences. They call them qualia. Qualia are the what it is like aspect of our mental states. A computer can have a camera and a light sensor that registers the wavelength of red light. It can identify the color red, but does it experience the redness of red? That inner subjective feeling, that is the qualia. This brings us to what the philosopher David Chalmers has called the hard problem of consciousness. To understand the hard problem, it helps to first understand what he calls the easy problems. The easy problems are not easy at all. They are the great, complex questions of neuroscience. They are questions of function. How does the brain process information from the eyes? How does it store and retrieve a memory? How does it focus its attention on one sound instead of another? How does it control the body to walk or speak? These are all questions about how the machine works. We can scan the brain, map the circuits, and, in theory, we can find the physical mechanisms for all these functions. Science is making incredible progress on these easy problems. But then, we are left with the hard problem. The hard problem is this: why and how does all of that physical processing, all of that functional, electrochemical circuitry, give rise to a subjective, inner experience at all? Why isn't all that processing just dark inside? Why aren't we just incredibly sophisticated philosophical zombies? Beings that look, act, and talk exactly like us, processing all the same information, but with no inner life, no qualia, no one at home experiencing it. Why does it feel like something to be you? This is the great gap. The gap between objective function and subjective feeling. Another great philosopher, Thomas Nagel, framed this perfectly in a famous paper called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" Nagel's point was this: we could, in theory, learn every single objective fact about a bat's brain. We could know its complete neurochemistry. We could perfectly understand how its brain uses echolocation, using sound to see the world. We could map every neuron involved in its flight and hunting. But, even with all that physical knowledge, we would still never know, from the inside, the subjective experience of what it is like to be a bat. We would never know what it feels like to perceive the world through sonar. That first person, what it is like-ness, that is consciousness, and it seems to escape our net of purely objective physical facts. So, how do we try to solve this? The main theories attempt to bridge this gap. Let us look at the most dominant theory in modern philosophy of mind, one we mentioned briefly before. This theory is called functionalism. Functionalism is a materialist theory. It agrees that the mind is a physical process, but it makes a brilliant move. It says, the mind is not about the stuff it's made of. It is not about neurons or biological matter. The mind, functionalism says, is about the job it does. It is about the functions it performs. The classic analogy is software and hardware. Your mind, your consciousness, is like a piece of software. It is a complex program. Your physical brain, the neurons and chemicals, is the hardware that the software is currently running on. Think of a word processor. That software, the function of word processing, can run on many different kinds of hardware. It can run on a laptop. It can run on a desktop. It could run on a phone. The stuff, the hardware, does not matter as long as it can run the program, as long as it can perform the function. Functionalism says the mind is the same. What matters is not the hardware of the brain, but the software of consciousness. What matters is the complex pattern of inputs, like sensory data, outputs, like behavior, and the incredibly complex relationships between all the internal states. If this theory is true, it has a staggering implication. It means that a mind, a consciousness, is not unique to biological brains. If we could, in theory, build a machine, a computer made of silicon chips, that was complex enough to perfectly replicate the functions of a human brain, then that machine would, by definition, have a mind. It would be conscious, it would have qualia, it would feel, because feeling is a function, a part of the program. This is the central philosophical idea behind the quest for true artificial intelligence. If functionalism is correct, then a conscious AI is possible. The hardware doesn't matter, only the software. If dualism is correct, then a conscious AI is impossible. A machine will always be just a machine, lacking the necessary non-physical mind stuff. Functionalism is a powerful and elegant solution. But the hard problem remains. Many philosophers are still unsatisfied. They ask, why? Why would that specific function, that specific software, to create the feeling of redness? It still doesn't explain the feeling itself. The mystery of consciousness, the mystery of your own private, subjective awareness, remains the deepest, most personal, and perhaps the most difficult question in all of science and philosophy. We have now explored this self, this mind, this stream of consciousness that is you. We have seen that it is a collection of thoughts, feelings, perceptions, and experiences. But this collection is in constant motion. Your thoughts are changing, moment to moment. Your feelings ebb and flow. Even the cells in your body are constantly being replaced. The person you are today is vastly different from the person you were 5 or 10 or 20 years ago. This raises a new, critical question. If everything about you is in flux, your body, your thoughts, your feelings, what makes you the same person over time? What is the thread that connects the you of your childhood to the you who is listening to my voice right now? This is the problem of who we are across time, and it leads us directly to our next lesson, the problem of personal identity. In our previous lesson, we ventured into the deepest mystery of the mind, the hard problem of consciousness. We explored the gap between the physical brain and the subjective inner feeling of being alive, the qualia of your experience. We have established that you are a stream of awareness, a continuous flow of thoughts, feelings, memories, and perceptions. But this very fact, this constant, flowing change, leads us to a new and deeply personal puzzle. Your thoughts are different from one moment to the next. Your feelings ebb and flow. Even your physical body is not the same as it was. The person you are today is vastly different, in mind and in body, from the person you were as a child. So, what is it that binds them together? What is the thread that connects the you of 10 years ago to the you who is listening to my voice right now? What makes you you across all that time and all that change? This is the question of identity, and it brings us to our 10th lesson, the problem of personal identity. As you continue to rest, as you drift in this quiet space of learning, there is no need to grasp for an answer. Simply allow your mind to be open to the question itself. What makes you, you? Let us first consider the most common, intuitive answer. This is the body theory. This theory states that you are your physical body. You are the same person you were 10 years ago, because you have the same physical, biological organism. Your identity is based on the spatio-temporal continuity, the unbroken path of your body through space and time. It seems simple. That child in the photograph is you, because that body grew into your body. But, as philosophers do, let us look a little closer. Is your body truly the same as it was 10 years ago? Science tells us that our bodies are in a state of constant, radical flux. The cells that make up your skin, your organs, even your bones, are continually dying and being replaced. The atoms, the very stuff you are made of, are being swapped out with every breath you take, every meal you eat. Over a period of several years, almost every part of you is, in a very real sense, new. If you are made of almost entirely different matter than you were as a child, how can you be the same physical thing? This puzzle is an ancient one. The Greek philosopher Plutarch famously described it in a thought experiment known as the ship of Theseus. Imagine a great wooden ship. This ship is the hero Theseus's famous vessel, and it is kept in a harbour as a museum. Over the centuries, the wooden planks begin to rot. To preserve the ship, one rotting plank is removed, and a new, identical plank is put in its place. A few years later, another plank is replaced, then a sail, then the mast. This continues, piece by piece, until, after 100 years, every single original part of the ship has been replaced with a new one. The question is the ship in the harbour still the ship of Theseus? Most people would say yes. It has had a continuous existence. It has been in the same harbour, serving the same function. But now, imagine that a clever craftsman gathered up all the old, original planks as they were discarded, and in a workshop across town, he carefully reassembled them, in their original order, into a ship. Now, which one is the real ship of Theseus? The new ship in the harbour, or the old ship in the workshop? This is a perfect analogy for your own body. You are the ship in the harbour, constantly replacing your parts. So, if your identity is not in the stuff, not in the planks, or the atoms, where is it? This problem, the failure of the simple body theory, led the great philosopher John Locke to propose a powerful alternative. This is the memory theory, or what we now call psychological continuity. Locke argued that our identity is not in our body, it is not in the physical substance. Our identity, he said, resides in our consciousness. It is our mind, not our matter, that makes us who we are. Specifically, Locke said that you are the sum of your memories. You are the same person as that 5-year-old in the photograph, not because you share the same atoms, but because you, right now, can remember that child's experiences from the inside, and that child could remember the experiences of the 4-year-old, and that 4-year-old could remember the 3-year-old. Even if you have forgotten many things, there is a continuous, overlapping chain of memories, a stream of psychological connection that links the you of today to the you of your earliest moments. This is your personal identity. It is yourself as a story, a continuous, conscious narrative. This theory is very appealing. It seems to capture what we feel about ourselves, that our minds, our memories, our personalities are the real us. But this theory, too, has deep problems. What about when you are in a deep, dreamless sleep? Your consciousness is interrupted. You have no awareness, no thoughts, no memory. When you wake up, are you a new person? Locke's answer was no. Because when you wake up, you regain the connection. The potential for memory is still there. But what about total amnesia? Imagine a person gets a brain injury and forgets everything about their past. They have no memories of their childhood, their family, their friends, or their own name. According to a strict memory theory, is this the same person? If identity is the chain of memory, and that chain is broken, then this may be a new person living in an old body. And what about the slow, tragic fading of memory in old age? In diseases like Alzheimer's or dementia, as a person's memories, their life story, begin to dissolve, does the person themselves dissolve? Does the identity fade away? These are not just abstract games. This problem of personal identity has profound, real-world consequences. In our legal system, we assume that identity is continuous. We punish a 50-year-old person for a crime they committed at 20. We hold them responsible. But if that person claims to be a different person now, or if they have no memory of the crime, how does that change things? If a person with total amnesia is, in a Lockean sense, a new person, is it just to punish them for the actions of a stranger? In medicine, these questions are at the heart of our most difficult ethical choices. How do we treat a patient in the late stages of dementia? Are we respecting the person who is still there, or are we caring for a body whose psychological person has faded? We have now explored the mystery of who we are over time. We have seen that it is not a simple question. It is a complex, shifting relationship between our physical bodies and our stream of consciousness. We have explored what the mind is and who this self is. But this self, this person, does one thing that seems to separate us from everything else in the universe. It makes choices. The choices we make, the choices that create our memories, shape our character, and define our life story. Are these choices truly our own? Or are they just another part of the physical machinery of the universe? Having explored our identity, we must now consider our agency. This leads us to the fundamental problem of free will. In our previous lesson, we explored the deep and personal problem of personal identity. We asked, what makes you, the same person, across a lifetime of constant change? We found that our identity is a complex, shifting relationship between our physical body and our continuous stream of psychological life, our consciousness, and our memories. This self, this person, is defined by the choices it makes. The choices of your past have woven the tapestry of your identity, the one you inhabit right now. But this raises the most profound question of agency. Are these choices, which feel so deeply yours, truly free? Or are they, like all other events in the universe, simply the inevitable result of a long, unbroken chain of cause and effect? This brings us to our 11th lesson, free will and determinism. As you continue to rest, as you let your mind settle into a state of open, quiet awareness, there is no need to solve this puzzle. It is one of the oldest and most difficult in all of philosophy. We are simply here to understand its shape, to explore the contours of the problem. Let us begin by clearly defining our two central and conflicting concepts. First, there is free will. This is the idea that we, as human beings, possess the genuine capacity to choose our own actions. It is the belief that when you are faced with a decision, say, whether to turn left or to turn right, both options are truly, actually possible for you in that moment. You are the source. You are the originator to the author of your own actions. This is the powerful, intuitive feeling that guides our every waking moment. It feels as though you are in control. On the other side, we have determinism. This is the idea that all events, every single one, including every human thought, every feeling, and every action, are ultimately and inevitably determined by prior causes. This is the foundational worldview of classical science. In a deterministic universe, every event is just one link in an unbreakable chain of cause and effect. Think of a line of dominoes stretching back into the past. The first domino falls, it must hit the second, which must hit the third. There is no choice. There is no other possibility. The state of the universe, 1 second ago, the position of every atom, completely and unavoidably dictates the state of the universe right now. The scientific revolution, from Isaac Newton onward, has been built upon this powerful idea. We can predict the orbits of the planets, the flow of a river, and the reactions in a test tube, all because they follow strict, deterministic, physical laws. And here, right here, we arrive at the heart of the conflict. You, your body, and your brain are a part of this physical universe. Your brain is a physical object, an astonishingly complex biological machine, but a physical object nonetheless. It is made of atoms, chemicals, and neurons. It, too, must be governed by the laws of physics and chemistry. So, if your brain is just a physical machine, and if all physical machines are governed by the deterministic laws of cause and effect, then where, in this clockwork universe, can any free will fit in? When you choose to raise your hand, isn't that just the final, inevitable result of a complex chain of neurons firing, which were caused to fire by a previous set of chemical reactions which were caused by external stimuli? A chain of causation stretching all the way back to your birth, and even before? This is the great problem. Our inner, subjective, private feeling of freedom, our free will, seems to clash directly with the outer, objective, scientific picture of the universe, determinism. This fundamental conflict has given rise to three main philosophical positions. The first position is called hard determinism. The hard determinist looks at this conflict, science versus intuition, and makes a firm choice. They accept determinism as a scientific fact. They conclude that the laws of cause and effect govern everything, and the human brain is no exception. Therefore, they conclude, our powerful feeling of free will must be a profound, though persistent, illusion. It is a trick our mind plays on us, a story it tells itself to make sense of its own actions. According to the hard determinist, you never could have chosen otherwise. When you chose left instead of right, that choice was inevitable. It was predetermined by the exact state of your brain, your genetics, your upbringing, your environment, everything that came before. You feel like you made a free choice, but that feeling itself was just another predetermined event in the physical process. For the hard determinist, there is no ghost of free will. There is only the machine. The second position is the exact radical opposite. This is libertarian free will. The libertarian, in this philosophical sense, looks at the same conflict and makes the opposite choice. They begin with the unshakable, subjective certainty of their own freedom. They say, I just know that I am free. When I deliberate and make a choice, I am the true, original source of that choice. Therefore, they conclude, determinism must be wrong. The chain of cause and effect must not be absolute. Libertarians believe that the human mind, or consciousness, or soul, is somehow special. It is outside the normal physical chain of causation. We have a power, an agency, that can start a new chain of cause and effect, all on its own, without being caused itself. When you make a truly free choice, you are a true, uncaused cause. This view saves our powerful intuition of freedom, but it creates a deep problem for our scientific worldview. It suggests that our minds are somehow non-physical or supernatural, capable of breaking the known laws of physics. This leaves us with two stark, opposing views. One says we are free, but perhaps unscientific. The other says we are scientific, but our freedom is an illusion. This is a very uncomfortable place to be, and so many philosophers, perhaps most modern philosophers, have tried to find a middle ground. This third position is called compatibilism, or sometimes soft determinism. Compatibilism is the elegant and perhaps tricky idea that free will and determinism are not, in fact, in conflict at all. The compatibilist believes that both can be true at the same time. They are compatible. This sounds like a contradiction. How can an action be both determined and free? The compatibilist solves this puzzle by redefining what we mean by free will. They argue that the hard determinists and the libertarians are both using the wrong definition of freedom. Freedom, the compatibilist says, does not mean the ability to break the laws of physics. It does not mean being an uncaused cause. That, they say, is a meaningless, mystical idea. No, for a compatibilist, free will means something much simpler and more practical. It means being able to act according to your own desires, without external coercion or constraint. Let us use a clear example. If you are at home and you want to raise your hand, and you do raise your hand, you have acted freely. If, however, you want to raise your hand, but someone is standing over you, holding your arm down, forcing you to keep it still, then you are not free. You are being coerced by an external force. The compatibilist says, of course your desire to raise your hand was determined by a chain of causes in your brain, your genetics, your past, your reasons. So what? Determinism is true, but the action was still free because it was caused by your internal desires, beliefs, and character, and not by some external force like a person or a chain. You acted freely because you wanted to do it, and nothing stopped you. This, the compatibilist argues, is the only kind of freedom that matters, the only kind worth having. This debate, free will versus determinism, is not just an abstract game. It is perhaps the most important question for our entire concept of society. It is the absolute bedrock of our systems of morality and law. Think about it. We only praise people, or blame people, or punish people for actions we believe they chose to do. We only hold people morally responsible for what we believe were their free choices. A hard determinist, one who believes freedom is an illusion, has a serious problem with this. If a person's every action was predetermined, if they truly could not have done otherwise, then how can we blame them for a crime? How can we justify praise or punishment? It would be like punishing a falling domino for hitting the next one. This view seems to dissolve all moral responsibility. The compatibilist, however, has an answer. They say we can still hold people responsible. Why? Because their free, compatibilist choice caused the action. The action was a result of their internal desires, their character, their beliefs, even if those desires were, themselves, determined by the past. We hold them responsible because the cause of the action was internal to them. It was their choice, and not an external force. We have now explored our own identity and the nature of the choices that create it. We have seen the deep and difficult problem of whether these choices are truly free, or if they are the inevitable result of a deterministic universe. Our choices, free or not, do not happen in a vacuum. We are not isolated selves. We live and we act in societies surrounded by other people and other selves, who are also making choices. This simple fact that we must live together raises the next great set of questions. How do we agree to live together? What are the rules? Who gets to make them? And what is the proper role of a government? This leads us directly from the personal to the public. We now move from the philosophy of mind to the philosophy of society. Our next lesson is titled Introduction to Political Philosophy, the Social Contract. In our last lesson, we confronted one of the deepest personal questions, the problem of free will. We explored whether our choices, which forge our identities, are truly our own, or if they are the determined outcomes of a universe governed by cause and effect. But our choices, free or not, are not made in a void. We are not isolated selves. We are born into families. We live in communities. We are part of a vast, complex society, surrounded by millions of other people, other selves, who are also making choices. This fundamental fact, that we must live together, raises an entirely new and equally profound set of questions. How do we agree to do this? How do we move from a state of individual survival to one of collective organization? Who gets to make the rules? What gives any person or any group the right to tell another person what to do? This brings us from the personal to the public. We now move from the philosophy of the self to the philosophy of the state. Welcome to our 12th lesson, Introduction to Political Philosophy, the Social Contract. As you continue to rest, as you settle deeper into this state of calm awareness, simply allow these concepts of society and government to be present. Political philosophy is the branch of philosophy that explores these very questions. It is the study of fundamental questions about government, authority, law, justice, and the rights and obligations of citizens. It does not ask, what is the capital of this country? It asks, what is a country? It does not ask, what is the law? It asks, what makes a law legitimate? What gives a government the right to rule? For much of human history, the answer to this question was simple, and it was brutal. The answer was power. People were ruled by the strong, by kings, emperors, and warlords. This authority was often justified by a claim to divine right, the idea that a ruler was chosen by God, and to disobey the ruler was to disobey God. But during the Enlightenment, the same period that gave us Kant and Locke, philosophers began to challenge this. They sought a rational justification for government. They argued that the power of a government, its legitimacy, must not come from a god or from force, but from the people it governs. This idea, this radical new model, is the most influential concept in all of modern political thought. It is called the social contract theory. The social contract theory is a model that attempts to explain the origin and legitimacy of government. It proposes that at some point in the distant past, or perhaps just in a hypothetical thought experiment, individuals who were living without any government at all, in what is called the state of nature, came together and agreed to form a society. They made a contract, a social contract. In this agreement, each individual voluntarily gave up some of their absolute, natural freedoms in exchange for the benefits of living in an organized, safe, and cooperative society. The government, in this theory, is the creation, the employee of the people. Its one and only job is to uphold its side of the contract. Now, the most fascinating part of this theory is that different philosophers had vastly different ideas about what that original state of nature was actually like. And these different starting points led them to justify two very, very different kinds of government. Let us explore the two most famous views. First, we have the English philosopher Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes lived during the terrible, bloody chaos of the English Civil War. His view of human nature was, understandably, deeply pessimistic. Hobbes imagined the state of nature, this time before any government, as a place of terrifying anarchy. He believed that humans, in their natural state, are driven by self-interest and a constant, desperate fear of death. Without a powerful authority to keep everyone in line, he argued, life would be a war of every man against every man. In his most famous passage, Hobbes wrote that life in the state of nature is solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. In this state of terror, Hobbes argued, there is no industry, no art, no culture, no security. You cannot trust anyone. Your freedom is simply the freedom to be killed at any moment. And so, Hobbes argued, rational, fearful human beings would eventually, desperately, agree to a social contract. But what kind of contract would they make? To escape this hell, Hobbes said, people would agree to give up all of their freedoms, all of their rights, to one all-powerful, absolute ruler. They would agree to create a sovereign, or what Hobbes called the Leviathan, a massive, powerful entity, like a sea monster, that would have total control. For Hobbes, The contract was a one-way street. The people give up everything, and in return, the Leviathan gives them one thing: security. Its job is to stop the war of all against all. And to do this, its power must be absolute. It cannot be questioned. It cannot be overthrown. Because for Hobbes, even the worst, most tyrannical government is better than the alternative, which is the horrific, bloody chaos of the state of nature. This is a social contract that justifies absolute monarchy or dictatorship. Now, let us turn to the second and far more influential view. This is the view of another English philosopher, John Locke. Locke had a much more optimistic view of human nature. He did not imagine the state of nature as a state of constant war. He saw it, instead, as a state of reason. He believed that even before government, human beings were not just savage animals, they were rational, and they possessed, by their very nature, certain natural rights. These rights were given by God or by nature itself. They are inalienable, meaning they cannot be taken away. Locke defined these rights as life, liberty, and property. So, if the state of nature was a place of natural rights, why would anyone leave it? Locke's answer was inconvenience. In the state of nature, there is no impartial judge. If someone steals your property, your only option is to be your own judge and executioner. This leads to bias and endless disputes. So, Locke argued, people make a social contract, but it is a very different contract from Hobbes's. The people do not give up all their rights. In fact, they do the opposite. They form a government for one single purpose: to protect and secure the natural rights, life, liberty, and property that they already have. This creates a limited government. The government is the employee, hired by the people to do a specific job, and its power, its legitimacy, comes only from the consent of the governed. This is the core idea of modern democracy. Locke's version of the social contract is the philosophical DNA of the United States Declaration of Independence. When Thomas Jefferson wrote that all men are endowed with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and that governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed, he was borrowing directly, almost word for word, from John Locke. This theory states that power does not flow down from a king, it flows up from the people. And it implies something else, something radical. If the government breaks the contract, if it stops protecting your rights and instead becomes a tyrant, the people have the right to alter or to abolish it. It is the people's right to revolution. We have now explored how we as individuals agree to live together as a society. We have seen how this social contract forms the rational basis for government. A government built not on divine right, but on the consent of the people. We have explored reality and knowledge. We have explored morality and the mind. We have explored our identity, our free will, and our political societies. We have, in effect, built the entire house of philosophy, the stage upon which we live our lives. We are now left with only one final and most personal question. We are here. We are in this world, in this society. Now what? How do we find meaning in all of this? In a world that may or may not have a purpose, how do we create our own? This brings us to our final lesson. We turn to the philosophy of individual meaning and authentic existence. This is the domain of existentialism. We have now traveled a great distance together. In our last lesson, we explored the foundations of our society. We saw how we, as individuals, come together to form a community, and how we create governments through a social contract to protect our rights and maintain order. We have, in effect, built the entire house of philosophy. We have examined its foundations, the nature of reality itself, our metaphysics. We have checked its structure, the tools of knowledge, our epistemology. We have furnished its rooms, the principles of morality, our ethics. We have explored the inhabitants, the mystery of the mind, the nature of our identity, and the question of our free will. And we have placed this house in a neighborhood, our political society. We are now left with only one, final, and most personal question. We are here. We are in this house, in this neighborhood, in this world. Now what? What is the purpose of it all? In a vast, silent universe that may or may not have a plan for us. How do we find meaning? This brings us to our 13th and final lesson. We turn to the philosophy of individual freedom, radical responsibility, and the personal quest for purpose. Welcome to existentialism, the search for meaning. As you rest, as you let go of the day, allow this final, profound philosophy to settle around you. Existentialism is not a system of complex rules about the world. It is a philosophy about the experience of the individual, your experience of living in that world. Existentialism begins with a feeling of disorientation, of being a stranger in the world. It looks at the vast, cold, silent universe, and it does not find any preordained map or any inherent, built-in purpose for humanity. The universe, for the existentialist, is indifferent. It was not made for us. It does not care about our hopes or our fears. For many, this thought is a source of despair, but for the existentialist, it is the opposite. It is the necessary starting point for our ultimate freedom. The central foundational idea of existentialism is a phrase made famous by the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre. That phrase is, "Existence precedes essence." Let this idea find its place in your mind. Existence precedes essence. To understand this, we must first understand the traditional view. For most of human history, philosophy and religion argued the opposite, that essence precedes existence. What does this mean? Let us use a simple analogy, the analogy of a knife maker. Before a knife is ever created, before its physical existence, the knife maker has an idea of it. They have its essence. They know its purpose. It is for cutting. They know its design. The entire meaning of the knife is defined before it is ever made. For centuries, this is how we thought of humanity. A divine creator, a knife maker, had an idea of us, an essence, a human nature, a purpose, and then we were created. Our meaning was given to us from the outside. Existentialism, especially Sartre's atheistic existentialism, rejects this entirely. There is no knife maker. There is no divine plan. There is no predefined human nature that tells you what you are for. Therefore, for you, for every human being, existence precedes essence. You are born first. You simply exist. You are thrown into this world, a conscious, aware being. You have no predefined purpose. You are, in this sense, a blank slate. And then, as you live, as you make choices, as you act in the world, you begin to create your own essence. You, and you alone, define what it means to be you. You are the author of your own purpose. Your essence is the sum total of your choices. This is the core of existential freedom. But this freedom, for Sartre, is not a simple, happy idea. It is a terrifying, radical freedom. He famously said that we are condemned to be free. We are condemned because we cannot escape this freedom. We must choose. Every moment of our lives, we are making a choice. Even not choosing is a choice. We have no pre-written script to follow. We have no human nature to hide behind. We have no external authority to tell us what is right or wrong. We are alone. And we are free. And with this radical freedom comes an equally radical and heavy burden, total responsibility. If you are completely free, then you are completely responsible for the person you become. You are responsible for the meaning you create in your life. You cannot blame God. You cannot blame your upbringing. You cannot blame your personality. You are your choices. This realization, Sartre says, is the source of anguish or angst, the dizzying, terrifying feeling of being completely responsible for your own life. Another great philosopher of this tradition, Albert Camus, approached this same problem from a different angle. Camus focused on the absurd. What is the absurd? For Camus, it is the conflict, the divorce, between two things. First, the deep, passionate human need to find meaning, order, and a rational purpose for our existence. We are beings who shout "why" at the universe. Second, the universe's response, cold, unreasonable, and total silence. A universe that offers no answers, no meaning, no purpose. The absurd is the clash between our cry for meaning and the world's indifference. For Camus, the question is, how do we live knowing this? He illustrates his answer with the myth of Sisyphus. In Greek mythology, Sisyphus was a king punished by the gods for his hubris. His eternal punishment was to push a massive boulder up a steep hill, only to reach the very top and watch it roll all the way back down. He would then have to walk down the hill and begin his task all over again, forever. This, for Camus, is a perfect metaphor for the human condition. It is a life of repetitive, meaningless, and futile labor, where the end goal is never achieved. And yet, in this hopeless story, Camus finds our victory. He says that the most important moment is when Sisyphus is walking back down the hill. In that moment, he is conscious of his fate. He sees the full, absurd meaninglessness of his task. And in that moment of consciousness, he is master of his fate. He is stronger than his rock. By accepting the absurdity, by refusing to give in to despair, by choosing to embrace the struggle itself, he finds his meaning. He creates his purpose. Camus concludes with this staggering line: "We must imagine Sisyphus happy. His happiness is his revolt. He finds his meaning not in a false hope, not in the goal, but in the struggle itself." This is the practical, real-world application of existentialism. It provides a framework for taking total responsibility for your life. It calls on you to live with authenticity. To live authentically is to embrace your freedom. It is to consciously choose your own values and then to live by them, courageously and responsibly. It is to be the author of your own story. The opposite of this is what Sartre called bad faith. Bad faith is a form of self-deception. It is when you pretend you are not free. It is when you run from your responsibility. It is when you say, "I have no choice," or "I'm just that kind of person," or "I'm just following orders." It is when you let the crowd, or society, or your past define you. It is when you act like an object, a knife maker's tool, instead of a free, conscious subject. Existentialism is a challenge. It is a call to wake up, to stop living in bad faith, to look the indifferent universe in the eye, and to create your own purpose with every single choice you make. Our course is now complete. We have journeyed from the first great questions of reality to the foundations of our knowledge. We have explored the paths of morality, the mysteries of the mind and the self, the contracts of our society, and finally, the personal search for meaning. You now possess the foundational questions of philosophy. The tools of thinking are in your hands. There is nothing more to learn tonight. Let this knowledge, this entire journey, settle in your mind as you rest, as you drift into a deep and peaceful sleep. Your work is done, but your journey of thinking, that has just begun.